Hello friends, my name is Vivek and I'll be giving you a detailed explanation on the chapter The Rise of Nationalism in Europe. This chapter is from the textbook in history for class 10 published by NCERT. This textbook is prescribed for all CBSE affiliated schools. So let's get started. If you like this effort, please do like this video and subscribe to my channel VIVEK'S Zone. Your suggestions will be welcome, which you can give in the comments below. Thank you. The chapter begins with a painting by a French artist named Frederic Sorrieu, who in 1848 prepared a series of four prints visualizing his dream of a world made up of democratic and social republics. He dreamed so because then such a world did not exist. Democracy was non-existent in most parts of the world. Frederic Sorrieu's paintings had some very important features. As we can see in the image, the people of Europe and America are marching in a long line and paying homage to the Statue of Liberty, which is a female figure. She bears the torch of enlightenment in one hand and the Charter of the Rights of Man in the other. This shows that people wanted and appreciated the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, and these principles are the basis of democracy. The next important feature, on the foreground of the image lie the shattered symbols of monarchical regimes. This signifies the downfall of the monarchical and absolutist regimes. Sorrieu's dreams that someday these absolutist regimes would collapse and in their place a democratic system would come up. The third important feature in this image, people are grouped as distinct nations identified by their flags and national costumes. So this was his utopian vision. Utopian here means that such visualization actually did not exist then, but he hopes that someday the different people of Europe would form their own distinct nations, and thus comes the idea of nation states. A nation state refers to a country with well-defined delineated boundaries resided by people with a similar culture, shared history, and ethnic character. It is also supposed to have a government of its choice. The people in a nation state are supposed to have unity, strength, and cooperation. So he visualizes that nation states would be formed in Europe. Now we come to the topic, the French Revolution and the idea of a nation. Now, when we think about the idea of a nation state, when we think about a revolution, we are reminded of the French Revolution, which we have already studied in Standard 9. It was a very important event in the history of Europe in particular and the world in general. Why so? Because this revolution brought about big changes in the system of government. It brought about big changes in the political landscape. It gave a huge setback to monarchy. And as we all know, that monarchy was in vogue during those times. And this revolution brought down monarchy in France. And it is also important because it gave the first clear expression to the idea of nationalism. The French Revolution is significant in another way because it led to the transfer of sovereignty from monarchy to the French citizens. That means the power to rule, the power to make decisions was now taken from the monarch, that is the king, and now it was given in the hands of the French citizens. This was important and it was a step towards democracy. France also came to have a constitution, a new constitution, and this constitution for the first time awarded the citizens with rights of liberty and equality. We all know that today's democratic constitutions do give such rights to their citizens. As we have come to know that the French Revolution gave the first clear expression of nationalism. This was possible because of the measures taken by the French revolutionaries to create a sense of collective identity among the French people. They took steps to create this collective identity, to create a sense of belongingness among the French people. The first step was the ideas of la patrie, that is the fatherland, and les citoyens, the citizen, was introduced. That is, the French people would consider France as their fatherland. This would unite all the French citizens. The idea of les citoyens was also introduced so that there would not be any differences of status among the French citizens. All of them would enjoy equal status as citizens. The second measure was the renaming of the Estates General as the National Assembly. We have studied about the Estates General in the old regime, which had representations from all the three states of French society then. Now, this Estates General was to act as the National Assembly. Or, in other words, we can say this Estates General was to act as the Parliament of France. And now its members were to be elected by active citizens. Who were the active citizens? Active citizens were those who had the right to vote. And those citizens were considered active citizens who paid taxes to the government. The next measure was the introduction of a new French flag, which replaced the former royal standard. Now a new French flag was introduced, which was a tricolor, and it had blue, white, and red colors. And this replaced the earlier royal standard. Royal standard means the royal flag that was in use, right? So this shows that now the French people were no more under monarchical regime. The next step was that the nation became supreme. Earlier, the king was supreme, the monarch was supreme, but now this idea was introduced that the nation is supreme. The next step, the next measure taken by the French Revolution was the composition of new hymns. New hymns and oaths were taken on the name of the nation. Hymns here means certain songs were composed, in praise of the nation. Earlier, they were in praise of the king. Earlier, oaths were taken by appointed officials in the name of the king. Now, these oaths were taken in the name of the nation. Now, this made the nation important, and it was regarded as the fatherland, as we have already studied about it. The next measure was the centralization of the administrative system. The administrative system was now centralized. Now it was in control uh, of the government, which was in place, and the uniform laws were formulated for all citizens. Earlier, different laws were meant for uh, different people in France, depending upon their hierarchy, depending upon their status. But now uniform laws were formulated and applicable for all the citizens in France. So this brought about uniformity in the administrative system. Also, a uniform system of weights and measures was adopted, and internal custom duties and dues were abolished. So, to um, to help trade and commerce, a new system of weights and measures was adopted, because earlier there were different systems of weight and measures in different parts of the country. So that would be a hindrance for trade and commerce. So these were done away with, and an uniform system which would be applicable throughout the country uniformly uh, was introduced, and even internal custom duties and dues were abolished. So the taxes which had to be paid in different parts of the country were also abolished, and this was done primarily to increase the trade and commerce within the country. The next step was the French language was made common language of the people residing in France. So as we all know that common language is very important to create a sense of collective identity. And here in France, the French language was made as the common language for the people. Let us now discuss the topic Napoleon and Civil Code of 1804. As we have studied in Standard 9, that after the fall of Directory in France, Napoleon rose to power and proclaimed himself as the Emperor of France in 1804. After that, he implemented some revolutionary ideas and principles in France. He introduced the Civil Code of 1804, also known as the Napoleonic Code. This code instituted the principle of equality of all people before the law, which means equality before law was established. Right to property was established, which means now any person in France had the right to own property. Also, all the privileges based on birth and class were abolished, which means no person in France would now enjoy any privileges merely based on his birth or class. This code was also promulgated to other parts of Europe which were controlled by France. So we know that Napoleon had conquered large parts of Europe and he introduced, implemented, promulgated this civil code in those areas as well. In many European countries such as Switzerland, Germany, Dutch Republic, and Italy, he simplified the administrative machinery. That means he made the administrative machinery more efficient by simplifying it. He also ended the feudal system. The hierarchical social structure, that is the feudal system, was done away with, was abolished. And he also liberated the peasants from serfdom. So many of the peasants were tied to the land of the feudal lord. They had to provide services and labor to the feudal lord without getting much rights in return. So these peasants were set free. In towns, restrictions imposed on guilds were removed. So guilds are uh, organizations of merchants, traders, craft persons. So the restrictions which had been in place on these guilds were now removed so that trade and commerce could be encouraged. Transport and communication systems were also improved, which facilitated the movement of goods and people. People of other European countries initially welcomed the French armies and Napoleon because they saw them as their liberator since they were under tyrannical rule of monarchs. But later they began to oppose them because Napoleon increased taxes and he also imposed censorship on them. He started ruling them. Let us now find out the reasons for the beginning of nationalism in Europe. During the mid 18th century, there were no nation states in Europe. Italy, Germany, and Switzerland were not one nation but were divided into various kingdoms. Central and Eastern Europe was under absolute monarchies. So, what led to the rise of nationalism? First of all, there was an emergence of the middle class in Europe, and this was an important development. The idea of liberalism also came into being, and a new conservatism after 1815 also arose, which was subsequently opposed by the people. So let us first look at the rise of the new middle class. Before the rise of the middle class, we see in Europe that there was an aristocratic class, which was a dominant class, but it was composed of only few people. Most of the people in Europe were peasants. So we can see there were two classes, the aristocratic class and the peasants. The Industrial Revolution resulted in the emergence of the labor or the working class. Many small industrialists, businessmen, and professionals who formed the middle class now gained prominence. So we see the rise of the middle class after the Industrial Revolution. Now, these classes supported the abolition of aristocratic privileges, demanded equality, and advocated the idea of nationalism. So, this class, the middle class, now played a very important role in the propagation of advocation of the idea of nationalism because this class was educated, was aware, and they wanted that the aristocratic privileges must be abolished. And they also demanded that equality should be established in society. Another important factor in the emergence of the idea of nationalism in Europe was liberalism. We have seen the industrial revolution led to the rise of the middle class. Now, this middle class stood for liberalism. Now, what is meant by liberalism? Liberalism in political terms stood for equality, freedom, formation and working of government by consent. So it wanted some basic rights for the people such as equality and freedom. And it also wanted a government by consent, a government elected by the people. In the economic field, liberalism advocated the freedom of markets and the abolition of unjust duties on the movement of goods from one territory to the other. So, in economic areas also, liberalism wanted that the freedom of market should be restored and unjust duties or unjust taxes should be abolished on the movement of goods from one place to another. The new commercial class argued for the creation of a unified economic territory, allowing the unhindered movement of goods, people, and capital. So the new commercial class, the trading class, they wanted that there should be a unified economic territory. We know that many of the states in Europe were divided into small kingdoms. Therefore, this class now wanted that there should be at least economic unification of these territories, which would lead to the unhindered movement of goods, people, and capital. So several measures were taken later on to achieve this end. First of all, in 1834, a custom union called Zollverein was formed at the initiative of Prussia. We are talking of German states. Several German states joined this union. The union abolished tariff barriers and reduced the number of currencies from over 30 to 2. So there were more than 30 currencies in the German states, and uh, that was an obstacle for the trade and commerce, for carrying out trade and commerce in the German states. So now this custom union, Zollverein, reduced this number of currencies from over 30 to 2. And many of the tariff barriers, many of the uh, taxes which were in place were also reduced so that trade and commerce could be encouraged. The introduction of railways also created mobility, leading to the national unification. So transport and communication was also improved, particularly the introduction of railways, which was crucial in bringing about national unification. So we find that a wave of economic nationalism strengthened the wider nationalist sentiments growing at that time. At this time, we also see the rise of new conservatism. And this idea of new conservatism was not liked by the people, and it was rather opposed by the people. And this idea of conservatism rose after the defeat of Napoleon in 1815. Now, who were these conservatives? The conservatives were those people who were of the opinion that traditional institutions of state and society like monarchy, the church, social hierarchies, property, and the family should be preserved. So uh, they did not support the idea of the liberals. Rather, they wanted that the prevailing institutions of state and society must be preserved. They wanted monarchy to stay. They wanted the influence of the church to stay. They wanted social hierarchy or the social structure based on hierarchy to stay. They were also of the opinion that property and the institution of family should be preserved. But they did not propose to return to the society of pre-revolutionary days. They wanted modernization in such a way that it strengthens the traditional institutions like the monarchy. The Vienna Congress. After the defeat of Napoleon in the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, the Vienna Congress was held, and it was participated by countries such as Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria. These were the countries who had defeated Napoleon. And this Congress was held to draw up settlement for Europe, how Europe would be reconstituted after the defeat of Napoleon. The Congress was hosted by the Austrian Chancellor Duke Metternich. Some of the results of the Congress of Vienna were, first of all, monarchy was restored in France and strengthened in Prussia, Belgium, and Austria. So this shows that the conservatives wanted to strengthen their position. They wanted to strengthen their hold over Europe. A series of states were also set up on the boundaries of France to prevent French expansion in future. Now, Napoleon, as we know, had conquered new areas, and after his defeat, these new territories were set up as independent states on the boundaries of France, so that France does not expand in future. The conservative regime set up in 1815 were autocratic. So these conservative regimes had autocratic rulers, those rulers who took decisions on their own. They took arbitrary decisions. They did not tolerate dissent. That means they did not tolerate any sort of opposition to their rule. They also imposed censorship on those materials and articles in newspaper, books, plays, and songs that reflected the ideas of liberty and freedom. So they were opposed to the obviously opposed to the idea of liberty, idea of freedom, and they did not want these ideas to reach the people, and that is why they imposed restrictions and censorship on media and on books, plays, and songs. Now, these conservative ideas also gave rise to liberal nationalists and revolutionaries because people were opposed to the idea of conservatives. And that is why many liberal nationalists and revolutionaries came up. Now, these liberals were opposed to monarchical governments. It was obvious. They advocated liberty and freedom and the creation of nation states. After 1815, many of the liberal nationalists went underground and established several secret societies. So the conservatives could not tolerate the idea of the liberal nationalists, and they wanted to suppress these liberal nationalists. And that is why many of these liberal nationalists who had come up had to operate from underground, and they established several secret societies to carry on their operations. One of the most famous and important revolutionary in Italy was Giuseppe Mazzini. He was a revolutionary, and he played a very important role in the unification of Italy. He did not want Italy to remain a patchwork of small states and kingdoms. Following his model, secret societies were established in Germany, France, Switzerland, and Poland. He opposed monarchy and wanted to establish democratic republic. Because of his severe criticism of monarchy, he was described by Metternich as the most dangerous enemy of our social order. So, such was the influence of Giuseppe Mazzini. And he was also the member of a secret society known as Carbonari. And he himself formed two secret societies to carry out the work of the revolutionaries. He formed the Young Italy in Marseille, and he also formed Young Europe in Bern. The period between 1830 and 1848 is known as the Age of Revolutions in Europe. The first upheaval took place in France in July 1830, also known as the July Revolution. The Bourbon kings, who had been restored to power in France after the Vienna Congress of 1815, were now overthrown by the liberal revolutionaries, who installed a constitutional monarchy with Louis Philippe at its head, which means that the king were no more effective rulers and that their powers were limited or curtailed by a constitution. This sparked revolution in Brussels, separating it from United Kingdom of Netherlands. So this had an impact on other parts of Europe as well. We can see an example where Brussels, which was Brussels, that is Belgium, which was under the control of United Kingdom of Netherlands, uh, had a revolution and it separated from Netherlands. Therefore, Metternich remarked, when France sneezes, the rest of Europe catches cold. That means the developments in France have bearing or impact on other parts of Europe as well. We also see during this period the Greek War of Independence, and the poets and artists, they had lauded Greece as the cradle of European civilization, and they mobilized public opinion to support this struggle against the Ottoman Empire, which controlled it. And the English poet Lord Byron, he organized funds, and he himself went to fight in the war, where he died of fever in 1824. Finally, the Treaty of Constantinople of 1832 recognized Greece as an independent nation. Another very important idea in the rise of nationalism in Europe was Romanticism. Nationalism emerged not only as a result of wars and battles. Culture played an important role in creating the idea of the nation. Thus, art, painting, poetry, stories, and music played an important role in strengthening the feeling of nationalism. And this is known as Romanticism. So, Romanticism was basically a cultural movement in which the artists romanticized human feelings and emotions. This was done to create a common cultural past as the basis of a nation. Stress was laid on vernacular languages and folklore. This gave communities who were living under the control of other powerful nations a cultural identity. For example, the people of Poland, who were under Russian control, defied the ban on speaking Polish. This was a kind of struggle to overthrow the Russian rule from their territory and to become an independent nation. Similarly, German philosopher Johann Gottfried Herder claimed that true German culture was to be discovered among the common people, that is, the Das Volk. The emphasis was laid on using vernacular language and the collection of local folklore, not only to discover an ancient national spirit, but also to carry the message of modern nationalist to illiterate people. So, romantic nationalism simply means the use of culture, the use of culture in promoting the sense of nationalism, in promoting the sense of belonging to a nation. So this factor was also an important factor in the rise of nationalism in Europe. The age of revolutions in Europe was also the age of hunger and hardships. The 1830s were years of great economic hardship in Europe, and it was because of certain factors. First of all, during the 1830s, there was large scale unemployment in Europe. In most of the European countries, employment opportunities were less, whereas job seekers were many. And this rise in unemployment can be related to the rise in population in Europe. Cities had come to be extremely overcrowded. As a result, slums had started coming up as more people migrated from the rural to urban areas. So, as the unemployment grew, people from rural areas, that is villages, started moving towards the urban areas, that is towns and cities, in search of jobs. Thus, the cities became overcrowded, and hence slums came up in order to accommodate these migrants. Small producers in towns were often faced with stiff competition from the imports of cheap machine-made goods from England, where industrialization was more advanced, especially in textile production. So we all know that industrial revolution had first taken place in England, and the goods produced in England were cheaper because they were produced in industries and factories with the help of machines. And these goods from England started flooding the markets in other parts of Europe. So the producers uh, in other parts of Europe were faced with competition from the goods made in England. Peasants too struggled under the burden of feudal dues and obligations. So the peasants were uh, struggling because they had to pay taxes to the feudal lords. They also had to provide services and labor to the feudal lords. So their condition was also quite miserable. The rise of food prices or a year of bad harvest led to widespread poverty in towns and the countryside. So whenever there used to be rise in food prices or whenever there was bad harvest, then that led to poverty in many parts of Europe, both in towns and the villages. Let us now see the revolutions of the liberals. The year 1848 was a year of revolts. These revolts were led by the educated middle class. In the Revolution of February 1848, the French monarch was dethroned and the country became a republic based on universal male suffrage. That means the right to vote was given to all men now. As we have already studied that in 1830 July, there was a revolution in France in which uh, monarchy came to an end and constitutional monarchy was set up with monarch Louis Philippe as the head of the state. But now in 1848, the institution of monarchy was completely abolished and the country was declared a republic. Republic is a state where the head of the state is not a monarch but an elected person. So now the head of the state in France was to be an elected person elected by the people. And also all the males, irrespective of their status, irrespective of whether they paid taxes to the government, were given the right to vote. In other parts of Europe, nation states did not exist yet, such as Germany, Italy, and Poland. The men and women of the liberal middle classes demanded constitutionalism with national unification. So after the developments in France, uh, the middle class in other parts of Europe also demanded the formation of nation state, both men and women, and they wanted that uh, their nation should be unified, and they desired that they be ruled by a new constitution. In Germany, people of educated middle class came together and decided to vote for an all German National Assembly. On 18th May 1848, 831 elected representatives marched to take their places in the Frankfurt Parliament. They drafted a constitution for German nation to be headed by a monarch subject to parliamentary control. The Prussian monarch Frederick William IV, however, rejected the constitution. So in Germany, the middle classes they formed a parliament. They met at Frankfurt, and 831 delegates were elected. And this was on 18th May 1848. And these representatives, these elected representatives, then drafted a constitution for German nation. And according to this constitution, the government was to be headed by a monarch, but his powers were to be controlled by parliament. The Prussian king, that is Frederick Wilhelm IV, however, did not like the idea and he rejected the constitution. The German parliament, which resisted the demand of the workers and artisans, lost their support. Later, the parliament, led by the educated middle class, was forced to disband. So, this parliament did not succeed in its ambition of unifying Germany and or forming a nation state, primarily because they were opposed by the monarch, by the army, by the aristocrats, and they also lost support of the workers and the artisans because uh, they did not accept their demands. Thus, the parliament that they formed was finally disbanded. At this time, women all over Europe campaigned for securing voting rights. So, women did not have voting rights in most parts of Europe. So now they started their campaigns for securing their voting. Let us now discuss an important topic, unification of Germany. The newly emerged middle class in Germany in 1848 tried to unite several German kingdoms which were suppressed by monarchies and large landowners known as Junkers into one nation state governed by an elected body. Prussia, a German kingdom, took the leadership in uniting various German states. Otto von Bismarck, the chief minister of Prussia, aimed to achieve the goal of unification with the help of the Prussian army and the bureaucracy. Spread over 7 years, the Prussian army fought 3 wars with Austria, Denmark, and France and successfully incorporated all these small German kingdoms. This marked the process of completion of German unification. In 1871, William I was declared as the Emperor of Germany at the Palace of Versailles. The process of the unification of Germany exhibited the power of the Prussian state. Many new reforms were initiated in banking, currency, administration, and judiciary in Germany. Thus, Germany was now unified as a nation state, and Otto von Bismarck was the architect of the German nation, and therefore he is also known as the Iron Man of Germany. Let us now see the process of unification of Italy. Italy, like Germany, was also politically fragmented into various small states which were ruled by monarchies. During the mid 19th century, only the state of Sardinia Piedmont was ruled by the Italian monarchy. The northern states were under the Austrian monarchy. Central Italy was under the control of the Pope, who was also the leader of the Christian world, the Catholic Church. And the states in the south were under the control of the Bourbon kings of Spain. Giuseppe Mazzini, about whom we have already studied, was a revolutionary who actively supported the unification of Italian states. And for achieving this aim, he formed a secret society called Young Italy. The state of Sardinia Piedmont obviously took the responsibility of fulfilling this task after the failed uprising in 1831 and 1848. The King of Sardinia Piedmont, Victor Emmanuel II, was actively helped by his chief minister, Cavour. Cavour led the process of the unification of Italy. In 1859, the state of Sardinia Piedmont defeated the Austrians. In 1860, the Italian forces, helped by Giuseppe Garibaldi, another revolutionary, and his volunteers, marched into southern Italy and unified it with Italy. Thus, the unification of Italy was completed. King Victor Emmanuel II was proclaimed as the King of United Italy. The complete unification of Italy was achieved in the year 1871. The process of formation of Great Britain as a nation state was unique. There was no one British nation before the 18th century. People residing in the British Isles, that is the islands that form Great Britain today, were mainly English, Welsh, Scots, and Irish. These ethnic groups had their own distinct political and social traditions. Now, as the English nation grew in wealth and power because of its colonies overseas and because of its trade and commerce, it began to dominate the other islands. In 1688, the English Parliament seized power from the monarchy. So, in 1688, the Glorious Revolution had taken place, through which the English Parliament took power from the monarchy. The Parliament then passed an Act of Union in 1707. Act of Union means a law was passed in 1707 by which England and Scotland were unified, resulting in the formation of United Kingdom of Great Britain. So through this act, Scotland was unified with England. The Parliament was dominated by the English, and the political and cultural identities of the Scots were systematically suppressed. So, since the English dominated the Parliament, they could pass that act, and the political and cultural identities of the Scots, they had their own distinct political and social identities, but these identities were systematically suppressed, dominated by the English. The Catholics in Scotland, they tried to regain their independence, but they were also brutally suppressed. Ireland was inhabited by the Protestants and Catholics. These are the two sects of Christianity. The English supported the Protestants and established their rule with their help and support. So English were mainly Protestants, so they also supported the Protestants of the Irish island, and with their help, they established their rule over Ireland. The Catholics, who constituted a majority in Ireland, revolted against the British on numerous occasions, but were suppressed. So the Catholics, in spite of being in majority in Ireland, they could not fight with the English because the English were more powerful, they were more dominant, and they revolted, but their revolts were suppressed by the English. Ireland was then forcibly unified with Britain in 1801. Thus, the uh, Great Britain as a nation state was born. The English language dominated. Both Scotland and Ireland were subordinate to England. This was obvious. Artists in the 18th and 19th century gave a face to the nation by personifying it. Most of the nations were portrayed as female figures, and this is known as allegory. So, allegory actually means when an abstract idea, for example, greed, envy, freedom, or liberty, is expressed through a person or a thing. The female figure became an allegory of the nation. For example, Marianne in France and Germania in Germany became allegories of their respective nations. Marianne's characteristics were drawn from those of liberty and the republic, that is, the red cap, the tricolor, and the cockade. Cockade means the ribbon which is worn on a hat. The allegory of the German nation, Germania, is seen wearing a crown of oak leaves, as the German oak stands for heroism. So, allegory is an abstract idea which is expressed through a person or a thing. It can be literal or it can be symbolic. Here we can see the picture of Germania, who was an allegory of the German nation. In this topic, nationalism and imperialism, we will primarily discuss about the problem in the Balkan region. Nationalism, which is the feeling of love for one's own nation, became intense and narrow-minded in the mid-19th century. Many nations became intolerant of each other and competed with one another for the control of territories. Imperialism is the territorial control of a region or a country by another country by using military control. So the powerful countries of Europe competed with each other for the control of new territories, and this was known as imperialism. This feeling of nationalism became intense in the Balkan region. Now, what is the Balkan region? The Balkan region is actually the peninsula region in southeastern Europe, and it is surrounded by water on three sides: the Adriatic Sea to the west, the Mediterranean Sea to the south, and the Black Sea to the east. The Balkan region formerly comprised the present-day territories of Romania, Bulgaria, Macedonia, Croatia, Greece, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Slovenia, Serbia, and Montenegro. The people in these countries were called Slavs. The disintegration of the Ottoman Empire in the region made the situation very explosive in the region, as every state was jealous of one another and hoped to gain independence at the cost of the other. One by one, the European nationalities in the Balkan broke away from the control of the Ottoman Empire and declared independence. As the different Slavic nationalities, that is the Balkan nations, struggled to define their identity and independence, the Balkan area became an area of intense conflict. During this time, many powerful European nations such as England, France, Russia, and Germany competed to gain control in the Balkan region. Now, this very competition for gaining prominence in the region was the main cause that led to the First World War in 1914. Later, several Asian and African countries which were colonized by the European nations began to oppose imperial domination. Anti-imperial movements that began in colonies were nationalist in nature, as people were fighting to form independent nation states.